Some of last week's top performers might be dipping. Will we catch Azorius control slipping?
It only matters if it ladders. Comment below as we walk through the Week 6 recap of Karlov Manor Standard. Alrighty, in Tier 1, we have Esper midrange at the top, with Boros Convoke and Dimir aggro narrowly behind it, rounded out with Domain and Golgari midrange coming in hot.
In Tier 2, Azorius control finds its footing once more, accompanied by the ever-present mono-red aggro and Bant Toxic. However, Temur Ramp came roaring onto the scene this past weekend, making its impact felt right away, and folks, we may have a new contender on our hands.
Lastly, in New Brews, we'll highlight the latest Grixis Hidetsugu build, an innovative white midrange list, a spicy Jund Fling deck, and an RCQ-winning Boros Burn creation.
Now, Rebels, as you know, we've partnered with TOAMagic on our State of the Meta series. Click the link below in our description to head on over after the video and check out their store. And while you're there, use code REBELLION to get 5% off your order on most products.
As always, TOAMagic can deliver all your cards in one package with free tracked shipping on every order and over 1 million fulfilled orders to date. Gang, show them a little love because they're a top-tier vendor, and every dollar spent using our code helps us grow this wonderful community that you're all a part of.
Now, onto our Tier 1 archetype breakdown, starting with Esper midrange.
Alrighty, so Soul Strong smashed a 30-player MTGO preliminary with Esper midrange, highlighting the winningest deck of Week 6. Esper midrange took home 3 trophies with a combined 14 top 8 slots. Now, folks, that is a dominant statement for any meta. This build in particular intrigued, featuring 2 mainboard Destroy Evils once more as a hedge for the Mirror, Domain, and Golgari midrange, while also pushing into that first Gix's command in the mainboard to push back against the Boros Convoke and Dimir aggro archetypes. So where are we getting these slots? We're down to just a couple copies of No More Lies in the mainboard, as you can see here, and there's no Make to Spear, along with a continued absence of Shieldred. The sideboard also sees the continued play of Kaido Shizuki over Tishana's Tidebinder, with the appearance of Cryptic Coat as a nod to the Azorius control decks running around. So, I mean, love it or hate it, gang, Esper midrange is here to stay for the season, so you better have a strong plan for handling it. Given that this is the best deck for Deep Cavern Bat, I'm honestly sorely tempted to call Rafine Batman at this point.
Oh man, Batman indeed. Talk to us, though, about a tension point I saw with the sideboard. Temporary lockdown? Is there any other way to go with the deck?
So, I mean, you can say no to temporary lockdown, and we know why it's there. It's there because Boros Convoke exists. It is there because Bant Toxic exists. And there is going to be that tension point with your Fairy Masterminds, with your Deep Cavern Bats. But honestly, I don't think it's a rough one. In many cases against Bant Toxic, you're okay just sideboarding in those temporary lockdowns and moving out the Fairy Masterminds. And if a bat gets hit by it, that can be a sequencing scenario that doesn't necessarily disfavor you, because these toxic lists are occasionally running Boseiju, and they're going to, and other enchantment removal. So they blow up the lockdown, you get the bat right back as they get other stuff, and possibly you wreck their hand again. I'm not saying it's ideal, it's not. But it's understanding that you have a certain number of options. You have Lockdown, Path of Peril, Glistening Deluge. Those are the 3 that you're going to look at when you're looking at beating Boros Convoke and Bant Toxic. And you've kind of just got to pick your poison, because you can't let it all go unchecked, or else you're going to lose that matchup.
Okay, yeah, being mindful of all the situations sort of makes this card just a bit more appealing than on first look. I totally understand. All right, let's talk about the next Tier 1 archetype, Boros Convoke.
I'm going to butcher this name. I apologize. Mick Bjorkman smashed through their regional championship qualifier in Sweden this past weekend using Boros Convoke. While this was the only trophy that came home with Boros Convoke pilots, 10 different pilots did make various top 8s throughout Week 6, highlighting this archetype's continued dominance in the meta. Now, this build has all the usual suspects, but the inclusion of Thalia and the exclusion of War Leader's Call is a shift that many have contemplated but not attempted in the past. The build for this is closer than most to the Pioneer iteration, and I love where most of it is positioned. Now, the main question here is whether we need Calamity's Wake with the squirming emergence of Atraxa Reanimator lists and Temur Ramp, or if it's just overkill and we can beat them before they ever get online. Now, the second question also is whether Wedding Announcement is actually better than Urabrask's Forge for the sideboard, and I'm not entirely sure there. We've used and seen Wedding Announcement in the past in Pioneer as a means to deal with the grindy decks, such as Rakdos midrange. I don't know if it cross applies to this format though, and that's a little rough.
Yeah, absolutely. So I did notice one of the cards, Calamity's Wake. Not too many players are experienced or know about this card. It doesn't see a ton of play. On first reading, right, you'd be tempted to think it's a white counter spell, but can you explain to the viewers how to use the card and why it actually doesn't function like that?
Yeah, so if you read the card, it says exile all graveyards. Players can't cast non-creature spells this turn, and then you exile Calamity's Wake. So many people may think if you cast this in response to a non-creature spell, it'll counter it. That's not how it works. They just can't cast additional non-creature spells once Calamity's Wake resolves. So let's say you cast this in response to one of their non-creature spells, and then they cast another non-creature spell. That would still be allowed until Calamity's Wake resolves. The key part of this text is really just that it says exile all graveyards, which if you've played against the Temur Ramp deck, if you've played against Slogurk, any Reanimator deck, that's what this is for. That's really why we're here and playing 2 copies of Calamity's Wake, is because we need a solution at 2 mana that says we don't automatically lose the game when they start comboing out of the graveyard.
Yep, makes good sense. Thank you for the explanation. I know I've gotten some questions about that card in the past, but let's move on to the next tier 1 archetype, Dimir Aggro.
Okay, I'm definitely butchering this name. I apologize. Marceli Sismaglinski. Really don't understand how to say that. Sorry, buddy. Emerged victorious from a 12-player WPN qualifier in Poland this past Saturday, piloting their version of Dimir archetype through a top 4 littered with mirror matches. Now, a full 10 pilots made it into various top 8s across events this past weekend, cementing its status in Tier 1 once again. And I love where this build is positioned right now. No Cryptic Coat in the main feels correct right now because Azorius control has taken a dip this past weekend, and the focus here, if you look at how this is built, is momentum. At this point, also, Max, can we just refer to Preacher of the Schism as Glissa for non-Golgari decks? I mean, it's yet another must-kill 3 drop that has no immediate impact, but is absurd if it gets going. And this deck feels like it's got like 9 to 10 must-kill threats with early interaction that limits your opponent's ability to do precisely that, stutter stepping its way into card advantage, and it's just amazing. It's just a great deck. I've played the crap out of it. I've loved it.
Same here. I love the must-kill threats, having tons of them. Whew, deck feels awesome. Now, I have a question. Would you say the sideboard here is spread a bit thin in this version of the deck, or are there other matchups? Are there other matchups that need shoring up, or do you like the sideboard?
I mean, I like where the sideboard is overall. I think it's got a nice, robust feel to it in the sense that you have multiple cards that are doing similar effects but have slight hedges for different matchups. For instance, you look at the 2 Duress and 1 Spell Pierce, 1 Disdainful Stroke, 1 Negate. These are all functionally for like control matchups, but sometimes you're going to want, like the Spell Pierces, the Disdainful, the Negates against some of those ramp decks, and maybe you don't want the Duresses there, and maybe you do. But the point is that it's not locked into linear sideboard game plans, which is what you see when you see decks like Boros Convoke, where they're like 4 end the festivities come in, which is great if you are looking for exactly that effect. But a deck like this is trying to diversify what it's doing, and it's trying to make sure that your opponent can't just cold clock it with a counter silver bullet, and that's what it's doing. That's why I like it. It's just really well diversified and spread out in the sideboard, and I like that.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. It definitely knows what it wants to do, and that includes the sideboard. Let's talk about the next archetype, Domain.
Mohammed bin Salman took down a 78-player MTGO challenge this past weekend with Domain, the strongest of 2 trophies this archetype garnered over the weekend while placing a combined 8 pilots into top 8s. This build's main board, fairly standard, deviating by cutting a copy of Invasion of Zendikar and a copy of Spelunking for 2 depopulates, but otherwise identical to last week. The sideboard, however, has shifted dramatically. 3 copies of Long Goodbye, 3 copies of Kutzel's Flanker, and 2 Stonebrains. I mean, this is wild compared to the sideboards we commonly see. So let's break it down briefly. Stonebrain makes a lot of sense when you consider it takes out key win conditions against Domain by a number of decks. Like you hit Jace against Control, you're going to hit World Soul's Rage against the Temur Ramp decks. There's just a lot of silver bullets that it can take and pull out and give you an advantage there. Long Goodbye, I'm going to assume that's there for Dimir and Esper midrange. Kutzel's Flanker, though, I'm really curious if we're that worried about graveyard strategies, if it's there as kind of a reasonable alternative to knockout blow against red. So comment below if you see which matchups we want this card in specifically, and be sure to tune in next week as we explore this further as well.
Yeah, definitely. Of course, I've also seen, in light of all the graveyard shenanigans, Calamity's Wake, Lord Skitter, Unlicensed Hearse, Frillbacks, you name it. But assuming the Graveyard Exile mode is why they have Kultil's Flanker, how do you rank all the various graveyard hate cards in the current meta? Both for Domain and really for any deck.
I mean, Kutsil's Flanker gets an edge over a lot of it because it's instant speed. Like the fact that it is a threat, not a great one, but a threat. It's reasonable, it's flexible, much like the Frillback, but unlike the Frillback, it isn't just happening on your turn. You can wait till they activate the Aftermath Analysts and try to pull all the cards out of their graveyard, all those lands, and you just go, nope, you don't have a graveyard, and you lost the Analyst. Like, it's kind of a cold counter for that if you play it right and they walk into it. The part I like more would be usually Unlicensed Hearse, because if you get it down on turn 2, it'll take care of a lot of business. The problem with Hearse is that if you get it like turn 6, you're way behind. It's not going to exile fast enough, right? So again, this is where I like diversification. This is where I like to see flankers and Hearses. I like to know that there are some early options, but there are also some later ones too. That's how I design, though. That's how I design. So maybe flanker just is that strong. And again, comment below if you think it is and you want to tell us why. We're open to it. That's what the comment section's for.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I'm in agreement with you. I like the idea of diversification, flanker, hearses. I think that's a great point for our viewers. Let's talk about the final archetype in Tier 1, Golgari Midrange.
In the second RCQ from Sweden, Per Sturson, again, I'm sorry if I butcher these names, claimed a trophy for Golgari Midrange, rounding out a weekend that included 6 pilots, top 8 events, and 2 trophies total for this archetype. Now, this build in particular shows an evolutionary step for Golgari, featuring Sharp-Eyed Rookie as a marked upgrade in aggression, while positioning a single copy of Namada in the main as well. Excellent for those mid-range grindfests that pilots often find themselves in. The 2-2 splits of Arcfiend and Shelly, also uncommon, as typically Golgari either goes all in on Arcfiends for aggression, or they just use Shelly instead, maybe even Blossoming Tortoise. The same can be said of this 1-1 split of Aclazotz and Gix's Command. I suppose it could simply be said that this build is as balanced as I've ever seen for Golgari, eschewing a hard hedge in favor of a strong base power level and minor tweaks in the sideboard for individual matchups. I like where this is, honestly, Max. Like, they balanced it. I've seen so many that hedge way too far in one direction or another. This is balanced.
Yeah, I like that assessment, especially in light of Namada being in there. I know Athena, that was something that Athena was talking about as tech for Golgari for quite some time, and I'm happy to see it go mainstream. I have a question, though. The 2 Surveil lands in the deck, how do you feel about the Surveil lands for Golgari? Do they fit here because it's mid-range? How do you feel about it?
I mean, I'm hesitant. I'm always hesitant when it comes to these. Normally I like having one copy in like Explorer, a little bit deeper, especially like Modern, where you get to fetch, right? And you can choose to fetch untapped or tapped. And or in a deck that has a little bit more of a graveyard reliance, which this doesn't really have so much of. So I'm not sure they are amazing here. My guess is they're here to let you cheat on the mana base slightly, and instead of having like 1 more swamp, 1 more forest, you get to play 2 underground mortuaries, and then you get a copy of Blast Zone. So it lets you cheat a little bit on your colored sources in the mana base and get more quote-unquote spell lands. And I think that's really the point of what they're trying to do here. Whether it's correct, they got a trophy. So it can't be the worst thing in the world, but is it correct?
Yeah.
We'll see as time goes on, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And that does it for Tier 1. Let's drop down into our Tier 2 archetypes, where I'll start things with Azorius Control. Matteo Palma emerged victorious from a 12-player WPN qualifier in Italy this past weekend on the back of Azorius Control, marking the only trophy of an archetype pushing 5 pilots into top 8s this past weekend. Now, to me, this seems like a pretty standard list when compared to iterations from the past. You got the 3 March of Otherworldly Light, still targeting a wide enough array of targets that it warrants usage here, especially in this meta. The deck does rely on Sunfall, as per usual. Disruption Protocol makes use of tokens from Sunfall Seed Shark, you can counter spells that way in addition to just paying the 1. No More Lies, of course, makes up the core of the counter spells in the deck, and I really think this card is singularly responsible for helping bring this archetype back into prominence. But a single mainboard Jace is also there to help with mirror and domain matchups. So I think a lot is accounted for here. Sunken Citadel is an interesting addition to the mana base, really enabling both your Restless Anchorages and your Field of Ruins to activate faster. If you consider Anchorage a win con like I do, then put that alongside Emperor and Whale and Seed Shark in the sideboard. I think this deck has enough win cons to push through.
And just a quick note to viewers, Sunken Citadel also counts for 2 when you're using Otawara and a Ganjo. That's a thing I didn't even know until I was messing with this deck the other day, and I was like, oh my god,
nice.
And it's for 2 on that too. That's lovely. So
I just learned that as well.
right. Nice. I was today years old when I learned it. Anyway, we look at this, Max, and I struggled with this over at the Pizza Box, and that's why I'm asking this question. I lost to Temur Ramp in round 4, and that was my 2-2. I'm out on the Pizza Box. What is Azorius Control's solution for Temur Ramp in your opinion?
It feels like there's something with that one Jace, right? Like maybe expanding it to 2 in light of the meta of that deck appearing. But Jace can certainly mill out Temur opponents since they're already kind of milling themselves as part of their main strategy. In addition to that, the 2 unlicensed Hearse targeting specific cards, like we pointed out earlier, it's not as good as Kutsil's Flanker in that case, but I still think it could help sort of stop them from reclaiming things in the graveyard, which boosts their life total, gets them even more lands, helps them ramp even more. So those are really just the first 2 things I thought of off the top of my head. Viewers, you're going to have to help us out in the comments. Let us know any other additional tech that you see that Azorius Control can sort of implement here. But those were the 2 things that stuck out.
I'm with you there. I actually am. I remember in game 3, I should have left I had 2 Jaces in the sideboard, should have left them in. I didn't. I pulled them out. I'm like, no, we'll be the aggro in game 3. They have inevitability. I was so wrong. They had 15 cards for 3 straight turns, basically. 15 or fewer. And I'm sitting there all I need is a damn Jace. This is on me.
Oh my god.
This is on me.
Yeah.
Anyway, let's get over to a slightly more aggressive deck that absolutely is the aggro and talk about mono red aggro.
Yes, Alan Santos piloted Mono Red to the semifinals of a 127-player Pizza Box this past weekend, but failed to claim a trophy. Now, this appeared to be a common theme this past week, with 6 pilots making top 8s, but no trophies in the making for them. This build in particular intrigues, as it is Speed Demon Red, better known to paper boomers as Sly. Felonious Rage in particular intrigues as a way to keep bodies on the board and trigger prowess. So I really like that card for this reason. Antagonize seems like a well-placed card here, considering the presence of mid-range in the meta. But the card I want to focus on, however, is Expedited Inheritance. We have seen in the past Case of the Crimson Pulse try to cover this area of red deck building in prior weeks. This card actually seems like it has the potential to really give red access to a lot of cards once it sticks, especially a red that's teeming with creatures. Right, you've got the 16 base creatures, you've got 4 more if you count the ones that you get from Felonious Rage, and then you have even more than that if you count Kumano Faces Kakazan.
Absolutely. Now, Max, when you look at this, is Expedited Inheritance, is it legit? Is it actually better than Case of the Crimson Pulse in your opinion? And if so, is 19 lands enough lands for mono red?
That's a really good question. I was looking at some of the math, right? And a lot of the recommendations that, I checked a couple of different sites and algorithms, and a lot of them said that the average land was in starting hand was 2.2. And I think 2.2, I think as long as it's above 2, that tends to be a good, for this deck in particular, where everything kind of curves out at 2, really. I think that's okay. Expedited Inheritance legit. I haven't personally tested this card, but based on my experience playing with and against red, I'd say that it's a creature-heavy deck, and it's equipped for this card to take advantage. Now, while Case forces you to run out of cards before it really starts taking effect with that final ability, Inheritance works almost right away. I believe this distinct advantage makes it a favored card over Case of the Crimson Pulse.
I mean, that's fair. That's fair. The problem with Case is sometimes you hit 3 mountains off the top and you just want to cry because that's the end of it. You're never getting them all down and turning Case on. Oh man, I've had it happen too many times. Whereas Expedited Inheritance, as long as you got creatures and you're rolling, I mean, just watch that snowball for you. So I feel you. I feel you on that. Let's get over and talk a little bit about Bant Toxic, though.
All right, another pizza box entrant, Procopio, took down the 127-player pizza box this past weekend with Bant Toxic, keeping the deck in Tier 2 land despite not a single pilot so much as top 8ing another event. But, you know, we count the pizza box here as a big event, so definitely have to acknowledge that win. Win big or bust seems to be really the motto of this deck and this week, and we're here for it. This iteration of the deck notably acknowledges the power of mono red with the 3 knockout blows in the sideboard. Defense against board wipes includes counter spells, as in the past. Copies of Spell Pierce and Negate grace the sideboard. But I also noticed the one Doorkeeper Thrall, and I'm wondering if this archetype is beginning to experiment with ways to mitigate Convoke with it as well. I could be wrong, though.
Yeah, it's actually kind of wild to see the Doorkeeper Thrall because you're playing cards like Annex Sentry in the main, and like, all right, so we're just done with Annex Sentry. And to be fair, it's a 1 Thrall, 1 Sentry, so I get that's just a straight 1/1 flip. But Max, I look at this and there's no Aspirant's Ascent in this list, unlike last week, and only a single Slaughter Singer. Why do you think that is?
So my guess when I saw that is that these slots actually went to Experimental Augury and Skrelv's Hive, the final Skrelv's Hive. I think the deck would rather find its counter spells and needed pieces like Rot Priest, for example, than try to evade the single target removal with Aspirant's Ascent, which was the main use of that card. The last Hive also helps the deck with the go wide strategy rather than one that attempts to grind through mid range. So maybe that's why Hive over Slaughter Singer. This could be a response to Convoke success going wide and needing to race that deck. That would be my best estimate.
Fair. I mean, it is a deck that has to be aggressive. And perhaps, Slaughter Singer just isn't getting it done right now, and Aspirant's Ascent is overkill. So I get it. I do. But we're going to turn our attention to the hot new deck on the block, Temur Ramp. Let's go.
Temur. Jonathan Shortall went undefeated in the Swiss rounds of the Pizza Box's 127-player tournament this past weekend with Temur Ramp, highlighting the power of this archetype that pushed 3 different pilots into top 8s over the weekend. It really feels like this deck came out of nowhere. This deck brings in Aftermath Analyst. This card in particular serves to place lands in the graveyard that can later be reclaimed right into play using the 4-cost ability on the card. Life gain will typically ensue from this as you reclaim any of the 12 Triome search lands that also gain you life on entry. This life gain, in my opinion, is critical in light of all the aggro matchups that you're going to face with Mono Red and Convoke. The big win con of the deck, though, World Soul's Rage. The key to this deck is sticking one of those virtues of strength and then clocking the opponent with a massive rage. Assuring the combo, of course, are cards like Colossal Sky Turtle and Joseki as well. Along the way, Nissa and Kellen will help you to ramp, while Memory Deluge will help you to find your pieces like Rage and Virtue of Strength.
And for those who have never played against this deck before, if you get Nissa out and you get to go like Aftermath Analyst, crack it, return like 6 of these, gain life, comes into tapped fetch lands, you get all of that mana from Nissa too. So you're going to actually come out net ahead and keep comboing. And there's a version of this I've seen. It's not this one, but I've seen an iteration that runs Spelunking so that when all those lands are supposed to come into play tapped, they don't. So that's an even faster scenario. But looking at this, I've seen builds, Max, that play with blue, and I've seen builds that are just straight red-green. Which ones are stronger in your opinion, and why?
So I took a look at some of those lists over the past week, the Gruul list in particular. Now, while those lists tend to use more direct green ramp, they'll have cards like Glimpse the Core along with Spelunking, and then they'll have Cave lands as opposed to the Triumph lands. This version, to me, can utilize more of those lands that search for basics and gain you life, right, with each application, such as the Broker's Hideout, the Maestro's Theater. Now, while those decks can have Light Up the Night in addition to World Soul's Rage, and they even have like Chandra and some of those as win cons, you'd think more win cons is better. This deck can make use of Sky Turtle, which in particular helps you to retrieve and do your thing. This deck has the advantage of life gain, which can help it outpace aggro. But it also makes use, really the ultimate reason is it makes use of one of my favorite pet cards, and I don't know if I can call it a pet card anymore, Ill-Timed Explosion. Ill-Timed Explosion is a board wipe. It dumps cards into the graveyard, and it draws you cards. So overall, I believe these are really two distinct decks, even though they're a similar archetype, even though they share ramp, right, as sort of the thing that they want to do, and Rage is a win con. I think these are two very distinct decks.
I agree with you. I actually like the blue-red, the Temur build a little bit better. I think the blue adds a whole nother dimension to the deck. If people are going to be on Stone Brain, I agree we need to get another win con pushed into the sideboard at least. But outside of that, I mean, as a main board game plan, I got ranched by this. Like, Temur Ramp absolutely rolled me in the tournament, and I see why. Like, it's just very efficient. It's difficult, especially for control decks, to contain that much ramp, because what are you going to do? Are you going to counter everything? You can't, right? And No More Lies, No More
Right.
Lies is offline by turn like 6. It's just gone.
Yeah.
It stops mattering. They've ramped right out of it. So if you don't have hard counters, everything else doesn't matter. So for those of you who are like, do I counter the first few spells with No More Lies? Yeah, you do. It's going to be dead in like 4 turns.
You do.
Just every time.
Watch out for this deck.
Yep, just do it every time. Try to
Yeah.
keep them off of it. But that's going to bring us to my favorite segment every week, Brewer's Corner. Let's kick things off. So this is Grixis Hidetsugu. It's the update. Thank you to Neokor of the MTG Rebellion Discord. Appreciate you tossing us this list. Now, the big update here is that we have Push-Pull. This was the card that we got out of the new set that we have been missing. This archetype has been praying for it, and we finally have it. I understand everybody likes Explosive Singularity and just winning on the spot, but this is pretty close, because you got to remember, it's going to be accounted for as if it's 8 points, right? So if Hidetsugu dies and we exile the top card of our library, we get to cast this for free, which is also going to bring back Hidetsugu. You see where we're going with this? We're just going to keep on rolling and rolling and rolling. And it's just a very excellently positioned Hidetsugu scenario, because if you do that, you're dealing 8 points right there, add another 5, that's 13 points already. If you can push one more on top because you get to sacrifice it at the beginning of the next end step, there you go. That's the last 8 points, 21 points, boom, boom, done. So it's got a lot. The math checks out. I think there's actually something there. I haven't had time to really mess with it, but for all our viewers out there, take some time, mess around with it. I think you'll enjoy.
Love the color set there. Love anytime a Grixis deck graces our Brewer's Corner. Right. Speaking of which, I have for you guys Jund Fling, another 3-color that, right, I get happy whenever I see Junder Grixis. But good gravy. I see exactly what this deck is trying to do. Let's go ahead and point out some cards. We have, in one sector, Not Dead After All, Undying Malice. Most of you are familiar with these types of cards already. They get reprints all the time. There's always at least one version of this black card in Standard. Now, note that these cards, along with Virtue of Persistence, can return a dead prototype version of Flesh Gorger back as the full version. I love that trick. The second sector of cards, second chunk, Callous Sellsword and Voldaren Thrillseeker. Both of these cards form the core of the deck with their ability to fling creatures at the opponent for damage, right? And then I also want to point out Rootwire Amalgam and Skullspore Nexus. These two cards in particular produce powerful creatures for you to fling for the kill. Skullspore in particular can also double the power of a target and net you a really strong body once you've already flung that creature and it's died. And then I also want to point out in the sideboard here, Whipcracker and Malicious Eclipse, 2 cards you don't typically see, but really great against the weenie decks and the token decks.
I mean, Max, I just love that you have so many scenarios in here where you wait next turn, you play Flesh Gorger on turn 4, backup, Not Dead After All. They kill, nope, never mind. Now you've got an 8/6 with Menace and Lifelink. And like from there on out, you could go next turn, turn 5, Thrillseeker, add 2 counters, smack for 10, fling it for 10, game. Like, that is a sexy, sexy combo.
Yeah, that's gross. I love it.
Alrighty. Well, let's move over. This one in RCQ. Boros, Burn is here. I didn't know we had enough burn spells. I'll be dead honest with you. I did not know that this deck could exist. But it turns out we have enough now. Helix got the reprint, and that was the critical missing piece, apparently. And this just smashed through everybody. And you can see why. You know, we've got deal 3, deal 3, deal 3, deal 2, deal 2 twice. And then this beautiful little Rem Careless that says, hey, what if it did one more? What if this was 4, 4, 3, 3? You know what I mean? And what if we had, a little Virtue of Courage, which deals 2 on the front end and then says, we're your engine. You know, you can Helix and draw 3 now. That's kind of nuts when you're like, hey, welcome to Ancestral Helix. So it's kind of wild. You know, we have Quintorius as well. Not super sure on how relevant this is going to be, but at the same time, it's still, you know, discovering for damage. You know, you're still burning with Quintorius here, and to be fair, I love this art so much I don't even really care if it's not relevant. I just want to play with it like forever. You know?
I love that art too. Yeah, and just looking at it, I don't want to tinker with it, but if I did, I think about some of those cards that boost red damage, Mechanical Warfare, the Red God, things like that. So I don't know. It seems like a fun deck to tinker with as well. But let's move over to the final list in our Brewers Corner today. Credit to Athena the Bun. Always love when she presents a list for us. Mono white mid range. Now we've seen Orzhov mid range, but it's actually been quite some time since anyone's brought us mono white mid range. Much like the OG shell, this one preserves some value for some longevity against opposing decks with planeswalkers that act like armies in a can, along with value packed creatures up the curve. You've got Novice Inspector this time around. Spirited Companion's still here. The Farmhand's still here. Don't forget about Adeline, though. Provides a board with all of these valuable ETBs, and Adeline in particular, a potent on-curve attacker. We've got 3 copies each of Emperor and Elspeth in the 4-drop slot, providing really some great curve toppers for the deck. You don't really need much more, but you do have some extra things in the sideboard, such as Sanctuary Warden, if you want to go up the curve more. And of course, Kutsil's Flanker is here as well. That's starting to become a staple in white sideboards everywhere. Notably, Elspeth's Ultimate is really good for replacing Sarah Paragon, which used to be in the shell, at bringing back all of your tiny creatures with ETBs.
And I talked a little bit to Athena about this, and she basically said your domain matchup is trash. Don't worry about it. You're going to lose, but you can win the rest. So for those of you wondering, like, how do you beat domain? You don't. You just don't get paired. You just dodge it as like the plague it is, and you move on with your life. And I apologize to Necro. I apologize. Boros Burn, that is your deck. Credit to you. Credit to everybody who tossed us stuff from the Rebellion Discord. Love you guys. Appreciate the hell out of you. If we forgot any of your names, so sorry. Anyway, moving on.
Oh yeah, Jun Fling was Matt 961 Ruin 20. I forgot that credit as well.
There we go.
Thank you, Discord Rebellion. Y'all are amazing.
Moving on. Let's go to our final segment here, predictions for the upcoming week. Now, Max, we looked at 13 archetypes tonight. What are your predictions going into week 7 of Karlov Manor Standard?
Well, I predict the Stutter by Azorius Control signifies the complexity in the meta having been introduced since last week. Temur Ramp brings with it a renewed vigor by opposing players to find better and better solutions for graveyard play. Expect to see Unlicensed Hearse, Graveyard Trespasser, Frillbacks, Flankers, or even cards you typically don't see like Calamity's Wake. I also think ripples from this shift will be felt through an upward shift in number of players piloting mid-range next week. So expect to see more Dimir, more Golgari. These appear to be the beneficiaries of this shift, but also expect, and I think more significantly, Esper and Domain to solidify their tier 1 spots even further than they already have. For my money, though, despite all of what I just said, I'm on Boros Convoke. Despite calls for this deck's demise, I still feel that much of the attention paid so far to hating aggro has shifted now to hating the graveyard and control. It still feels like this deck that just shouldn't win continues to do so at a rapid rate, with so many Boros mirrors present in my personal encounters in ladder, present in top 8s. I've had to tune my list and find the exact right cards for this moment in the meta. I actually believe I have, and I think it'll remain a deck that I use in the coming weeks to compete, both in ladder and in paper events. In fact, I've actually released a deck video on my personal channel describing why I believe my build to be the best out there, so go check that out. But I'll leave you with this, like I told my viewers this week, use this opportunity to see why so many of us old players still find a low creature-based curve to be one of the funnest ways to play Magic. Aggro's in a good place right now. Take advantage of it. How about you, Riktus, though? What's on the horizon for the standard meta?
I mean, week 6 brought about the decline of Azorius Control, the rise of Golgari midrange, and the advent of Temur Ramp. Everyone else played about where we expected them to on the tier list, though Esper midrange arguably has claimed the top slot moving forward. So I would expect to see Esper midrange continue to give most of the format problems as the Batman and Robin duo of Rafine and Deep Cavern Bat wreak havoc. Now, Temur Ramp looks strong, but there are some significant gaps in its flexibility due to the rigid deck requirements necessary to make Plan A, which is ramping, pay off. Now, to me, this is endemic of why decks such as this will pop up for a weekend or two before typically falling back into obscurity. Thus, my prediction for the upcoming week is that we see Esper midrange continue to reign supreme, shifting a few slots in the main and in the side to account for those expected meta shifts. But my dark horse is Golgari midrange. It's quietly been picking up trophies left and right and building a consistent top 8 resume over the past month. Just get ready, because March Madness ain't just for basketball, and I'm here for Golgari midrange's rise to the top.
Hell yeah, you raised a good point. All right, thank you for your support by watching this video to the end. I really want to give a special shout out to our members who have joined the Rebellion and support our content weekly. Now, if you'd like to support what we do, be sure to turn on all notifications, join us for our premieres, like and subscribe. It's really the best way to let us know that you want to see more of our competitive MTG content. And for those of you who can do a bit more, feel free to check out our merch below and join the Rebellion. We're working on our subscription tiers and we're adding new incentives, so be sure to pay attention for more announcements regarding that in the future.
And until next time, Rebels, untap, upkeep, resist.
Resist.